Hey, what's going on everyone? In this review, we'll be looking at the second lead suit from Stardust Memories, the GP01-FB Gundam Zephyranthes. This is another one of those kits that people wonder, should I wait for a 2.0 or is this 20-year-old kit still worth picking up? So to find out, we'll be reviewing this classic Master Grade in 4 categories: the build, appearance, articulation, and gimmicks. We'll be giving each a score from 1 to 5, so at the end we can tally it all up for an average score. Hopefully this review can help you decide if you're down for a kit this old. Okay, now let's jump right into this build. With this kit coming out way back in 1997, you have to go in expecting the worst. I mean, this came out before the Riga Z, before the Kampfer, and before even the Ground Gundam. Having said that, the initial snap build wasn't as taxing as I thought it'd be. You could pretty much knock this out in a day or two. Surprisingly, there's no screws in this build and nothing needing glue. It's kinda surreal for a kit this old. The engineering still shows its age quite a bit though. I mean, everything functions about how you would expect, but things are just a little bit skewed. For example, most kits have a 360-degree spin on the upper arm, which is achieved through a polycap and a peg. However, for some reason on this kit, it uses a ball joint. Why? I don't know, but hey, it still works, right? Moving on to the armor, there are quite a few bad seam lines, but honestly I'd say the Riga Z suffered a bit more. The only major seam lines here are on the front of the feet, the top of the shoulders, and the side of the head. This kit only really becomes a problem with its painting and its detailing. Let's just run through some of the bare bones detailing you'll have to do to get this guy looking half decent. Fair warning though, we're going to be here quite a while. Starting with the feet, I recommend adding black to these indents on the side. They just help distract from this horrible seam line on the front. Next, you can add this gray line on the front and back of the foot. Nice deep channels make this a really quick touch-up. After that, there's this gray line to help cover up the seam line on the front of the leg. You can also add some black into these vents on the knee. Adding red to this thruster on the back is also a nice touch-up. I wanted to add black to the inside of this lock on the side, but there's no part separation, so I avoided the headache and just skipped it. The first truly mandatory fix is this red line on the front of the knee. The provided sticker looks horrible and will pop up in seconds, so painting is a must. Back to the optional detailing, I'd highly recommend painting all these gray lines wrapping around the thigh. They just help cover up more seam lines and they look great. On the front skirts, adding gray paint to this circle really makes it pop. Same for this rectangle on the side skirts. Onto the chest, I used gray paint for this channel on the side, just to cover up a seam line. Another truly mandatory touch-up is this yellow V on the chest. The provided sticker is just terrible, so paint is absolutely required. Unfortunately, it's built into the chest, so you're gonna have to break out some masking tape if you want it to look good. Last on the chest are these green camera lenses. They come in clear and there is no provided sticker, so paint is your only option. On a side note, they don't really fit into the chest too well, and adding paint really doesn't help the matter. I mean, just look at this stress mark. Moving on to the shoulders, there are a few tick marks that really benefit from some black paint. We also get the fourth mandatory painting spot, these huge thrusters on the front. They're built into the blue piece, so you're gonna have to add this red inside the thruster, then black around the thrusters, and lastly some gray around the rim just to top it off. Or at least that's the method I used. I'm sure there's a much better way out there. You also need to add a bit of red to these pop-out thrusters on the side. You'd be surprised how prominent they are, so red can really make them stand out. Same for this thruster under the shoulder behind this flap. Onto the arms, there's more deep channels screaming for gray paint, and there's also this lock on the side. Again, there's no part separation for this lock, so I straight up just didn't bother. On the head, you need to add this gray to the side vents, since there's no inner frame to poke through here. I also recommend adding yellow to the head Vulcans, however they're built into the head, so they can be a real pain to paint up. And technically there are takes on this Gundam with white head Vulcans, so there's a case either way. Onto the backpack, there are more channels that really look good with some black paint. You can also add red to the inside of all the thrusters to make them stand out a bit more. Finally, there's some more mandatory painting to do on the top of these thrusters. This whole section is a single white piece, so it's all painting. And that should about do it. While the initial snap build was weird, it wasn't horrible, but this amount of detailing and painting is pretty crazy. However, it's nothing impossible and most of it can be done in a few minutes with a Gundam marker. Still, I have to give this build a slightly below average score of 2.5 out of 5. Honestly, that's still a pretty high score considering what this build could have been. Now let's take a look over his appearance. First thing that hits me here is the complexity from the waist up. There's just so much going on. Little hatches, panel lines, decals, vents, all the colors. It just kind of overloads you. That would be a bad thing, but considering Stardust Memory suits are kind of known for being overloaded with detail, I can't really fault it here. What I can fault on this kit is the lack of detailing on the legs. It's so surreal to have all this detailing from the waist up, then have the legs just so clean. I mean, there isn't even a panel line on the side. It's like the top and bottom of this kit were designed by two entirely different people. It also loses points in the anime accuracy department with this alteration to the knee. It's supposed to be one simple piece, but for some reason they stuck a random rectangle here. I guess it's another one of those modern redesigns. Still, the proportions are actually pretty solid here. There's a good mix of that old school bulkiness and the sleekness of modern redesigns. I actually think the silhouette of this suit is pretty solid. The heft of the shoulder thrusters really help fill this kit out too. The colors are a bit weird on this kit though. First off, I love the yellow. It's really deep and has a bit of orange mixed into it. Unfortunately, it's only found in the chest. The white on the other hand is kind of off. Nothing too bad, and I wouldn't say it looks too toyish or anything, but it's not quite right. However, the blue and especially the red are another story. I mean, they're borderline neon and they just look really cheap. Thankfully, a thick layer of paint would essentially solve this problem. I'm a really big fan of these decals though. You don't get a ton, but the ones you do get are pretty great. The dry transfers have quite a few faction names and model numbers. The peel and stick are a bit more basic, but you do get 2 Yellow Earth Federation symbols. Like the 08th MS team suits that came out a little bit later, you get a few optional parts you can glue onto this guy to bump up some of the detailing. Maybe you could use them on the legs to spice them up a bit. Alright, the appearance is a pretty mixed bag here. The colors are a bit hit or miss, but the proportions are pretty solid. I also really like the decals and the optional parts you get. Really, in a simple standing pose, this model kit actually looks pretty good. I'll give this appearance an above average score of 4 out of 5. I know that seems a little bit high, but really he doesn't look that bad, especially if you do a full paint job on him. Alright, now let's see how his articulation fares. Starting at the feet, you actually do get some tilts here. Not a lot, but still, it's surprising. The ankles are on a decent ball joint, but the sideways movement is a little bit limited. You get a little bit more than a 90-degree bend from the knee. It's nothing great, but you can move this front section on its own. On a side note, this leg feels really weak, and he'll often lean backwards with the weight of the thrusters. The hips are the classic ball and socket, so you get the usual kicks, but not too much else. All of the skirts are independent, even the back one, which is pretty rare. The chest is connected to the waist with a pretty poor ball joint. You get next to nothing here. Since there's a core fighter inside, the rest of the chest is just a brick too. The shoulders use the old style polycap on a peg, so you get spins, but nothing else. Thankfully, the shoulder armor can swing up independently, which helps with holding the shield. You can take off this top hatch to reveal a sliding mechanism which pops out these little thrusters on the side. It's a pretty cool little feature. The arms have a decent 360-degree spin on top with that ball joint, and you get a 135-degree bend from the elbow. The hands here are on ball joints, and you get that old style trigger finger split, no pegs or anything. You do get a dedicated set of open hands and closed fist though. The head is on a single ball joint, so you don't really get too much here. The backpack looks like it'd be a simple plug, but actually there's a few hinges involved in this core fighter. All said and done, it really doesn't stay in too well. The back thrusters themselves are on a series of hinges, so you actually get some solid movement out of them. However, you'll only ever want them close up and centered, since they cause some serious weight issues if you extend them too far. All in all, the articulation here is pretty poor. It's not the worst out there, but it's still pretty bad. I doubt you'll get this guy into any cool poses. I'll give the gimmicks a below average score of 2 out of 5. You're pretty much limited to a standing shooting pose and a standing upright pose. And finally, let's take a look at these gimmicks. First up is the token beam rifle. Unfortunately, it's really boring. It's just 2 large gray pieces slapped together with a couple details in between. You even need to add this red around the scope because it comes in clear. Thankfully though, he can actually hold this rifle pretty well. I mean, it's not as good as having pegs, but still he can actually hold the gun without any additional help. It's pretty crazy. Next up are his beam sabers. You get the standard 2 handles and blades. Like the rifle, he can hold these no problem too. Lastly, you get this massive shield. I really like this sort of cross between the Mark II shield and the original Gundams. Unfortunately, it attaches into the back of the arm, so it'll normally be facing backwards. Of course, because of how massive these thrusters are, that really isn't an option. The large shoulders don't help much either, so getting the shield in a good position can be a little bit difficult. Thankfully, it can fold in half though, which kinda solves the problem. And that's it for the weapons. There's no bazooka, no optional gun, nothing. Instead, the focus here is on his core fighter. I actually really like the look of this core fighter. It has enough details to be interesting, but not enough to where it overloads you. I will say it benefits a lot from adding red to all the thrusters and by painting up this top section here. It comes with a set of landing gear, but unfortunately you'll never get to use it because there's no dedicated core block. Yeah, this fighter needs to be inside the Gundam at all time, since there's no dedicated core block to take its place. It's a bit disappointing, but I suppose with the size of these thrusters, having a second one would really crank up the price tag. Another gimmick here is found in the chest. You can swap out these chest vents for these exposed vents. You'd think this wouldn't be too hard of a gimmick to get working mechanically, but nope, it's all part swapping. Still, it looks fine, so I can't say it's a negative. Lastly, you can remove these foot covers to reveal a more regular sized foot. Honestly, I've never really been a big fan of these clown feet, so I'm probably going to have him displayed like this most of the time. And that's it for the gimmicks. Just the rifle, saber, shield, and core fighter. Just the basics really. I would have bumped the score up a little bit for the core fighter, but without a dedicated core block it completely goes to waste. I'll have to give these gimmicks an average score of 3 out of 5. It just barely scrapes by here. Finally, let's wrap this up for an average score. The build was a 2.5 out of 5. It's not as bad as you'd think, but the amount of detailing can be a kick killer for most people. The appearance was a 4 out of 5. His proportions and optional parts are pretty great, but the colors could use a big overhaul. The articulation was a 2 out of 5. This is another one of those put him in a standing pose and don't touch him kits. And the gimmicks received a 3 out of 5. While he is lacking overall, what you do get works pretty well. Tallying all that up, dividing, and of course rounding, this kit receives a 2.9 out of 5. More accurately, it receives a 57.5%. So would I recommend this kit? Probably not, no. But it's also nowhere near as bad as you'd think it'd be. The build, despite the amount of detailing, wasn't overly flawed. He also looks pretty solid, and the weapons you get do work pretty well. Of course, you're not getting any poses here, and you need to put in quite a bit of work to get him looking good. But still, that's to be expected of an older kit. Really, if you're an experienced builder, you might have some fun with this kit. But for everyone else, you're going to want to wait for that 2.0. Alright, feel free to leave any questions or comments you have below, or to recommend more kits for me to review, and I'll see what I can do. You can also follow me on Instagram for updates and general chit chat. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.